Imagine trying to read a storybook with almost all of its pages missing. That is what it is like for scientists trying to understand our planet's very distant past. The Earth is incredibly old, and the clues from billions of years ago are often lost or damaged. It is a great puzzle. To solve it, scientists must become detectives, searching for tiny pieces of evidence that have survived through the ages. They look for hints trapped in ancient rocks, frozen in ice, or hidden at the bottom of the sea. Each new clue, no matter how small, helps us to piece together the incredible story of how our world and everything living on it came to be. It is a story of immense change, of lost worlds, and of the slow, steady rise of life. Recently, scientists have found an amazing new clue. It comes in the form of tiny, round stones called ooids. These stones are no bigger than a grain of sand, and they look like miniature pearls. Ooids form on the seafloor, layer by layer, over a very long time. As gentle ocean currents roll them back and forth, minerals from the water slowly build up around a central speck, like a snowball getting bigger as it rolls downhill. This process happens very slowly. For this new discovery, scientists looked at special ooids made of iron. These tiny iron spheres formed in oceans that existed long before the dinosaurs, more than 1 billion years ago. What makes these little stones so special is that they are like tiny time capsules. As each new layer of iron mineral formed, it trapped tiny bits of whatever was floating in the seawater at that time. Think of it like a fly getting caught in tree sap that later hardens into amber. The fly is preserved perfectly, telling us about the world it lived in. In the same way, these ooids trapped microscopic particles from the ancient ocean. By carefully studying what is inside, scientists can learn what the seas were like so long ago. They can discover what was in the water, what the temperature was like, and what kind of life might have been present. This is why the discovery of these iron ooids is so tremendously exciting. A team of researchers, led by Professor Jordan Hemingway from ETH Zurich, realized that these stones held a secret history of the ocean's chemistry. They gathered ooids from different parts of the world, some as old as 1.65 billion years. By using very powerful and precise tools, they were able to look inside these ancient spheres. They were not looking for treasure in the way we might think of it. Instead, they were hunting for one of the most important ingredients for life on our planet, carbon. The story these tiny stones told was about to change everything we thought we knew. Carbon is one of the most important building blocks of life. Every living thing on Earth, from the smallest bacteria to the largest blue whale, is made of carbon. It is in our bodies, in the food we eat, and in the air we breathe. In the oceans, carbon is just as vital. It exists in many forms, but one of the most important is called dissolved organic carbon, or DOC for short. This is basically a soup of tiny carbon-based particles that come from living things. When tiny sea creatures like plankton live and die, they release this carbon into the water. This provides food for other, even smaller organisms, forming the very base of the ocean food web. For a very long time, scientists had a particular idea about this ancient carbon soup. They believed that in the Earth's early history, hundreds of millions of years ago, the oceans were overflowing with dissolved organic carbon. The theory was that there were not enough complex creatures or oxygen in the deep sea to consume it all, so it was thought that this carbon just built up and up, creating a massive reservoir. Scientists imagined an ocean that was like a rich, thick broth, full of the ingredients for life. This idea was used to explain many important events in Earth's history, including big changes in the amount of oxygen in our atmosphere. But the tiny iron ooids told a completely different story. When the researchers analyzed the carbon trapped inside their layers, they were astonished. They found that the amount of dissolved organic carbon in the ancient oceans was not huge at all. In fact, it was incredibly low. Their measurements, published in the journal Nature, showed that from about 1 billion to 541 million years ago, The ocean's carbon reservoir was 90 to 99% smaller than scientists had always assumed. It was also much smaller than the amount of carbon found in our oceans today. This was a truly groundbreaking discovery. This finding turns old ideas completely upside down. The notion of a thick, carbon-rich ancient sea was wrong. Instead, the oceans of that time were surprisingly clear and clean, with very little organic carbon floating around. It is like expecting to find a pantry full of food and discovering that the shelves are almost bare. This meant that the scientific explanations that relied on the idea of a high-carbon ocean were now in question. It forced everyone to rethink the history of our planet. If the oceans were not full of carbon, then what really caused the huge changes that led to the world we know today? One of the biggest puzzles in Earth's history is how our atmosphere became filled with oxygen. We know there were two major events, often called oxygen catastrophes or great oxidation events, where oxygen levels rose dramatically. The second of these major oxygen surges happened during the same period the Yoids were studying. The old theory connected this rise in oxygen to the huge imaginary reservoir of oceanic carbon. But the new discovery that this carbon reservoir was actually very small means that story can no longer be correct. This challenges the entire scientific narrative and sends researchers searching for a new explanation for one of the most important events in our planet's history. So, if the ocean was not a vast carbon soup, where did all the carbon go? The researchers who studied the Yoids have proposed a fascinating new idea. They suggest that during this time, life in the oceans was evolving. The first single-celled organisms were getting bigger, and some were even clumping together to form the first simple multicellular life. These larger life forms, when they died, would have sunk through the water much faster than tiny individual cells. The scientists call this process marine snowfall, where clumps of organic matter drift down into the deep sea like snowflakes falling from the sky. This marine snowfall is the key to the mystery. Back then, the deep oceans contained almost no oxygen. When this fast-sinking carbon snow reached the bottom, there was nothing there to consume it or break it down. Instead of being recycled back into the water, it was simply buried and trapped in the sediment on the seafloor. This process acted like a giant vacuum cleaner, constantly removing carbon from the ocean water and locking it away in the seabed. This is why the amount of dissolved organic carbon in the water remained so surprisingly low for hundreds of millions of years, creating a carbon-poor ocean. This new explanation creates a much clearer picture of how our planet works. It shows a direct link between the evolution of life, even simple life getting a little bigger, and the chemistry of the entire planet. The ocean's carbon reservoir only started to grow again much, much later. It was only after the deep sea itself became filled with oxygen that organisms could live down there and recycle the carbon that sank. This allowed the carbon to re-enter the system, and the ocean's deep-sea reservoir eventually grew to the massive size it is today, holding around 660 billion tons of carbon. This story of ancient oceans and tiny stones may seem like it is all about the distant past, but it holds important lessons for us today. It highlights a delicate and powerful relationship between life, oxygen, and carbon in our oceans. The research shows that a major change in one part of this system, like the amount of oxygen in the deep sea, can trigger enormous shifts across the entire globe. For hundreds of millions of years, the low oxygen deep sea caused carbon to be buried, which in turn affected the evolution of life and the chemistry of the atmosphere. It reminds us that our planet's systems are all connected in ways we are only just beginning to understand. The new framework helps us understand not only the history of life on Earth, but also how life might develop on other planets. When we search for life on distant exoplanets, we often look for signs of oxygen in their atmospheres. This study shows how crucial it is to also consider what is happening in the deep oceans. A planet could have life, but if its deep seas lack oxygen, its global carbon cycle might behave in a very different way from our modern Earth. The history written in these oids provides a new model for what a living world might look like, expanding our search for life beyond our solar system. The most urgent lesson, however, relates to our own actions. Today, human activities are causing significant changes to our planet. The burning of fossil fuels is warming our climate, and this warming is causing oxygen levels in the ocean to decline. This process is called deoxygenation. At the same time, pollution from farms and cities runs into the sea, which can also create vast dead zones with very little oxygen. We are, in a way, pushing our oceans back towards a state that resembles the low-oxygen world of 1 billion years ago. This ancient story serves as a stark warning. By studying these iron oids, scientists have given us a glimpse into a very different Earth. It was a planet where a change in oxygen levels in the deep ocean triggered a massive planet-wide shift in the carbon cycle that lasted for an immense period of time. This new research warns that the changes we are causing today could potentially set off similar large-scale and perhaps irreversible shifts in the Earth's systems. The tiny stones from the bottom of the sea do not just tell a story about the past, they carry a profound message for our future, urging us to protect the delicate balance of our own living planet.